Hello.
Hi, Callie. How are you?
I'm good. I'm so happy to be here. How are you doing?
I'm great. I'm great. I'm really happy to talk to you too. And now we're not even in the same time zone because you're a number of hours ahead of me in Scotland.
Yes, yes. Many hours ahead of you since you're on the West Coast at the moment.
So I can't wait. I know we're going to dive in a little bit to what you're doing over there. But first of all, for people who are joining us and listening to this conversation, you and I met through a cool project we're both a part of called Generation F, a
Yes.
docu-series on the future of the fashion industry, really through the lens of a younger and next generation of leaders. And that's how I met you, through my co-producers on the project, Mark and Domenica Lebo, and we've gotten to know each other through that work. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we've done a few exciting things since then, which is awesome. I've been so grateful that I somehow got looped into the project.
Well, I think it's what's great about it is, and you know this, and we'll dive into that project a little bit too. I'm sure is we're really interested in getting sort of a different lens of views from people that are studying business, people that are materials focused, activists, and so really looking at the different points of view of individuals, and one of the reasons why I also wanted to kind of bring you into this forum where the Apparel Impact Institute and having conversations with people who are leading the, and I think I shared this with you, my sort of idea for doing this pod series or podcast series was really around people who inspire me. And I've been, in the 6 months plus that I've known you, I've been inspired really about your vision and leadership. And so thank you again for joining us. But let's
Thank
talk about
you.
who are you? What are you doing?
Yeah,
Why are you here? Like let's talk
yeah,
about
no,
you.
definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I got looped into the project honestly via the group that I run, which is FashionX. And this group at Stanford. We like to consider ourselves a community and think tank, and who are kind of trying to get young people more into the fashion industry, who are thinking about really disruptive ideas around sustainability, but also around race and how we do business and tech. And so I run that with my co-president and kind of got involved with the project through a mutual member. And so in addition to kind of the side research that I've always done in relation to sustainability within the industry, FashionX is like my little child that I have been nurturing over the past year or two. So it's a very exciting organization.
That's interesting. So when you came to Stanford, and I know you grew up in New York, and so you came out to the West Coast, and was that the first time you'd really kind of spent time out on the West Coast, coming out to Stanford, or yeah?
Oh yeah. I mean, I did the huge college tour road trip of the West Coast and did like all the UCs, but Stanford was my first kind of real experience in California, and so it was insane. I mean, it was very different, so much more different than I thought it would be. Not only in relation to I think kind of this West Coast lifestyle, but I was in Silicon Valley and really immersed in kind of a community of people that are constantly thinking about new ideas, new strategies, new business proposals. So it was kind of automatically thrust into that world.
I think that, to me, the conversations that we've had, and hopefully I will, as we'll dive in today, what drew me to you was that connection that you're making around sort of the way in which we look at a fail fast approach towards building new engines, innovations, technologies, platforms, and how that same level of design thinking and experimentation needs to come into this industry. And I think that was something that I was really kind of inspired about your thinking around this, and want to talk about it. But I'm also curious in sort of setting the stage about you. So you arrive on campus. Had you done ever any sustainability work before that? Had you been aligned growing up or in high school, been part of teams or projects related to
Yeah,
sustainability?
no, not at all. Honest, I mean, I'd always been very immersed in the student activist world. I did a lot of work around consent and kind of the Me Too movement in high school. I ran kind of a feminist organization there, and then also did a lot of work around kind of gun laws and just kind of in these various movements in the city in particular, where young people were kind of getting much more involved into policy. But I think, and this might be because of being in New York, it might have been kind of a California shift. I was not a nature person, like I was not outdoorsy. And so I think was quite disconnected from conversations around sustainability because I thought of it as like, if you're into camping, you're into sustainability. Like that was the connection I was making. It didn't feel personal. And then kind of it got to Stanford and there was much more of a focus. You know, we were doing trips to Yellowstone and there was kind of this conscious conversation about like, we have to preserve these areas around us. And I mean, my first year, we had 3 days off due to wildfires. And that like hit me like, wait, this is so close by. The environment is directly related to kind of how I live my life, even though I've lived the past 18 years thinking I was this like urban kid who wasn't really ever going to engage with nature. So it was quite jarring to come to the West Coast and really begin to engage with environmentalism.
But you know, you bring up a really, what I think is a critical point, which is this concept of access to sustainability, who feels like it's relevant or pertinent. And when you brought up this sort of idea about, you know, I thought that was for people that go camping. I remember years ago, someone enlightened me, you know, the modern movement is born out of land conservation movement. And if you go back 100 plus years and look at some of the initiatives that Teddy Roosevelt established for land use, access to parks, all of that was established kind of under a mindset of white patriarchal land ownership. And this idea that land conservation is something for people who get to own land, right? And to have a lot of land and they can decide how we have access to land. And I think that's trickled down as part of the, what my theory is, it's trickled down as part of the brand of sustainability and environmentalism, that it still feels to many people like, am I onto something? Is this accurate? What is your perception?
Oh, totally. I mean, I completely agree. And I think a lot of my research, I always kind of try and bring it back to New York City because I think it's a conversation that has been quite restricted to, you know, this kind of like hippie, white, often wealthy, outdoorsy community. But something that I actually think is a little bit exciting is I think COVID has completely changed our value of the outdoors, whether you're in a city or you're in a rural area in New York. We had to go to the park. You know, we couldn't do these conventional New York City outdoor activities. And so I'm actually really optimistic that the past year has made urban communities a lot more personally invested in their environments, just kind of as a byproduct of like, that's how I see my loved ones. That's how I can get outside and help my mental health. And so hopefully as a result, we'll see more resources kind of funneled into communities that we thought wouldn't really be helped by, you know, constant interactions with their environment.
That's a great point. You're right. We have spent 12 months only being allowed to sort of see each other in outdoor settings. And so therefore, how does that translate into our understanding of that? So as you arrive on this, and did you see like some advertising for a meeting or about FashionX?
Yeah, so I think it's kind of funny. I think I arrived at Stanford and I stood out to the former presidents and the co-founders of FashionX. I think particularly because I was like one of the few people not wearing sweatpants or Birkenstocks, which was like classic Stanford. No one dresses up to go to class. It's like, and I was used to in New York, it's like you get ready to go out, even if it's, you know, for a quick trip to like coffee. It's just a culture of we care, I think, a lot more about almost like a materialistic experience, at least around my friend group. And so I ran into this girl and she was like, I love your pants. And I was like, they're thrifted. And she was like, you should just stop by because I'm trying to start this club because I think that fashion deserves a place on campus because Silicon Valley is totally going to change it. And I was like, sure, I'll stop by. And I showed up. It was like 4 people. And we just kind of started talking about how Silicon Valley was completely going to change the industry and how this very kind of artistic design focus on fashion was so limiting for us. And it's what we wanted to kind of go into these other branches of the industry in itself. And I was always interested in politics. And so I think I was figuring out how to kind of relate my experiences and my interest in fashion together. And so my freshman summer, I landed this internship at Vogue. And there was when I kind of started to realize, okay, here are the things I want to change. And a lot of them had to do with waste and how much clothes we were using and how much they were costing, even though I knew they probably were $10 to produce. And so it was kind of a long development of my interests, but over 5 months, I kind of found sustainability within the industry.
So it really was like the systems thinking and the inefficiencies and sort of like the common sense around business models and all that really kind of brought you in, right? The idea of this is a sector that's primed for disruption. And that's going to happen in a lot of ways. Yeah.
Exactly. Cool. And I think also like I was kind of gone through what was the current administration being very discouraged. Like, how am I going to make any change in DC? And so to kind of fall into a different vehicle for progress was so exciting. And then I just kind of hit the ground running and was like, this is it. This is the place where I'm going to engage in policy in a different way and start to make impact with my research. And so it was kind of like, I started with policy and landed in fashion, but I think they're more related than people think.
Totally. Well, and it's like one of the thesis that we have is that it's an industry that it's almost like a playground for all these issues. And it's a really interesting and creative one to actually work through a lot of systems thinking approaches towards manufacturing, toward, diversity, acts, all these topics that we want to kind of blow up, and fair living wage, human rights, all this kind of centers around this one industry, and we all wear clothes. Something that absolutely is like, yeah, kind of key.
Yeah, so, it's right.
Okay, so what you? Yeah, right. What year did you land on Stanford campus? In
2018.
2018. Okay, so then you fast forward a year and a half later, and pandemic happened, and then George Floyd and Black Lives Matters happens. And then we're all reading about like how the industry, retail is just like kind of shut down. And we, with this project with the Generation F, we were calling it the tipping point, and that's what we called our pilot. And we talked to you a little bit about that then. Do you think last year and now still and climate crisis, by the way, that little thing. So you got a pandemic, you've got like accelerated climate crisis issues, and then with fires and drought, and then you've got social justice issues in the United States that it's carrying over globally. Was last year and this year still a tipping point? What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a hard question because I think in so many ways we're running out of time in regards to the climate. And so to be, very blunt, like something needs to happen and quick. And I'm hopeful that my generation is kind of going to light the spark that gets it going as quickly as possible. I do think, however, we want to acknowledge that communities have been facing all kinds of discrimination and frustration, and trying to engage with them for, the civil rights movement was in the 60s. Like it's been a ridiculous amount of time. And I think George Floyd definitely was this turning point. And I think it's because of social media, and like we can't ever ignore it. And so I think it's not necessarily a tipping point in the sense that new things are happening and like all of a sudden there's new people who are interested in them. It's a tipping point because we have tools of spreading them a lot quicker that I don't think previous generations had. And I think, the George Floyd video spread in 24 hours, and our globally. I mean, I just grabbed a coffee with someone who's from Scotland and saw the video the next day. And so we're in a tipping point because information is of complete access all of a sudden. And I can create something and have a platform to put it on without doing much work. And so I think we're at a tipping point kind of in that sense of the tools that we're using are life-changing in my opinion.
So hear you say, thank you. Love saying when I hear you say that, it come back to this word access. And we were talking about land and conservation and who gets to be part of sustainability. And now we're sort of talking about, hey, with very little investment time, or I can get whatever my idea, my product, my concept out there. And then the idea that you can't hide, right? Like all of a sudden, everybody has access to a lot of information. How do you see, like, tell me about how you see this concept of access and diversifying participation and all that, because I've heard you speak about it before. I'd love to hear you share more.
Yeah, I think it's simultaneously like something I'm very excited about. When we talk about social media, we talk about all of a sudden enormous herds of people kind of being able to engage with topics that were exclusive to certain locations, that were exclusive to certain groups. But it's also, I think, probably my biggest fear in like the world of sustainability and kind of the activism that has been coming through, because, to be a sustainable consumer is expensive a lot of the time. And, I have been operating on a student budget and I can make it work, but I have disposable income. It might not be as much as someone else, but I have it. And yet so much of this country does not, especially in a time like this. And I think activist circles can get quite shamey at times, and quite exclusive and weird, even though we're preaching like thoughts of change and progress. And so, I am excited for social media and kind of the ways in which sustainability is becoming more accessible, but I'm quite worried that it's also becoming exclusive and we're shaming groups who have different responsibilities than we do. And kind of this conversation as to like, who has the access to actually be an activist, to engage all the time with the conversation of sustainability is always at the top of my mind and kind of always something I'm wrestling with.
So FashionX providing like access across not only its campus, but does it look across the Stanford campus? But you're actually not on the Stanford campus now. You're on St. Andrews, which is great. We'll talk about that too. But like, how is that bridging and broadening to other people? Is this something that would be like a club in universities, or does that already exist? Like, yeah, tell me more.
Yeah, I mean, that's the goal. We have a lot of goals for kind of what FashionX can do and how it can serve as kind of this leader amongst kind of the organizations of students that are talking about fashion differently. It's not just like, let's bring in a CEO and have him talk to us about how we can make a lot of money in this field. It's like last week we brought in the chief of people and culture at Kith to talk about like appropriation and how can we take and give at the same time when we talk about streetwear. And so there's different conversations that need to be had that students, I think, are right at the center of. And so we really want it to become beyond Stanford's campus. But I think in terms of kind of this conversation around access, we are trying to get particularly, students of color voices within the fashion industry that often aren't reached out to, like talking to us and engaging with us as peers and not just as, students who want to eventually become CEOs. It's like, oh, they're listening to us as much as we're listening to them. And so trying to kind of foster a codependent relationship with industry leaders is what I'm trying to do, is like understand that we can serve you in the same way that I'm asking you to come and kind of serve us. And so that's kind of our approach that I'm hoping is really getting at this conversation of access, and also going to go national at some point, hopefully.
I love it. So, so in summarizing or defining FashionX, like when you're on the elevator and you're giving the like, tell me about FashionX, and you've got that elevator pitch, you know, like what the proverbial elevator where you have 2 minutes or less. But like, what is your like FashionX is, and this is how you
Yeah.
describe what it is.
Yeah, I mean, so FashionX, we like to say it's a community of change makers who are really engaging in disruptive conversation on what fashion is and where it's going. And then it's also this think tank that is bridging industry leaders and students to engage with actual work and change that starts to put those ideas into motion. So it's this kind of two-pronged community that we're growing quite quickly, which is exciting.
Very exciting. And then FashionX will be like, where do you see it going next?
Yeah, I mean, I see like a student on the board of every major fashion company. Like that is my goal. Like I think that fashion companies should have active students on kind of their decision making board and in the room. And my kind of goal is for almost to like give companies representatives to be like, this is what we care about. We're not going to buy this product if you don't do this, because we're a financially defining generation, which is really exciting. Like we have power. And so I'm hoping that FashionX can kind of start to make companies realize that and incentivize them to bring us into the room and kind of bring us to the decision table.
Totally. That's exciting. I like that vision. So I run an organization, you already know this, but I run an organization that is working with brands and manufacturers to reach their environmental goals. And so I have access to that C-suite that you're talking about, and definitely the sustainability leaders inside the company and across different people working on sourcing globally and all that. What do I need to know from you and your peers? What do I need to know in order to do my job better as I'm talking to these companies?
Yeah, I mean, part of the reason why I think I'm excited about Gen F is like I do think there's a bridge that needs to happen between this kind of corporate level policy and this grassroots policy, because you know we're doing this social media work, but someone has to listen at some point, and I'm happy that that connection is already kind of being formed. But I think another thing that I really want, I think you to know and also businesses to know is like, we don't expect, I think, as students for these unrealistic, completely philanthropic decisions. We want to help kind of incentivize a version of consumerism that is ethical and that is sustainable, but that is fun and that is profitable. And so I think sometimes this vision of like students calling for sustainability is like, how is it going to happen? How can you make me do that? I'm going to go bankrupt if I listen to all of your demands. But we're interested in strategies that are business minded. That's something I really hope gets to the C-suite. You know, we want to help with those kinds of solutions.
Well, one of the things I've already learned through being a part of this Generation F docuseries is listening to the interviews, whether I'm reading transcripts later or going back and is how different this generation that you're part of, is how different your activism is from previous generations. I think that, first of all, Gen Xers, we didn't really like activism, so we didn't really like leave us alone was sort of our but you know, my peers and generation, I think it was designed let the house kind of approach, no plan in place. Think where, and that's gross generalization, obviously, of looking at baby boomers or other generations and saying, you know, there was no plan. Of course, I'm sure there were millions of people with wonderful plans and were experiencing a lot of these and changes that are related to LGBT, related to diversity policies. I mean, we're seeing a lot of shift that's happened in the hands of older, generation my age and older too, in decision makers. But I feel that like maybe a lot could have happened. There been this, what you just described, which is we may be activists, but we're activists with a plan that is fun and profitable and builds a better world, right? Tell me about that more.
Absolutely.
You agree?
Oh no, I
Yeah.
completely agree. And I think something I'm also, I think, really excited about kind of our generation in comparison is I think past generations have done a lot of amazing work in isolation of each other. We've seen the feminist movement and kind of the Black Lives Matter movement. And one thing I see our generation constantly doing is like we're obsessed with intersections. It's like, how do we put everything together and strategize? And the conversation around intersectionality is just like never ending in kind of my circle. And I think now so many other circles. And so it's exciting to kind of build on all this past work that's been done and then start to lock everything together. And so I think, I never want to discredit all this amazing activism of the past because we're building on it, we're using it. But we're offering a fresh perspective that I think is going to kind of help employ policy that's directly influential and consequential on kind of the way we lead our lives.
I love it. Yeah, you remind me of this. I'll paraphrase, but some kind of quote about progress, which is you don't get to kick out the box underneath you. Like you don't get to kick the rungs of the ladder out. You need every one of them to get. So we're here because here everything that was done before us, right? You don't just because, and some of this might not have been right or accurate. When you know better, you do better, right? We love that quote, and so then it's like, okay, now we're going to
Absolutely.
build on that, right?
No,
Amazing. I love it.
totally.
Well,
Totally.
when campus reopens, and I'd love to, if you ever have guest speakers, I would love to come meet your group, if nothing else. Or I don't even have to speak. Maybe you guys speak to me, and I just want to listen because
Oh
I
my
would love to
gosh,
be a
no,
part of that.
I would be
You're
so
only
nice. I
30
mean,
minutes
I'm
that way.
excited.
I mean, get to Stanford. Okay,
Exactly,
so
you're close by.
yeah, totally. Okay, so of course, like I could spend I could spend a whole other half hour with you, but like, are you hopeful about what your generation has taken on? Not because you wanted to, but because we've created this world for you. So, you've taken it on. Whether and so, are you hopeful about where we're headed?
Yeah, I think I'm very, very hopeful, and I think it can be certainly difficult. I think we have to acknowledge, like, sometimes it's really hard to be optimistic. And, I exist in this kind of research world of waste. And it's like, as I'm coming up of ways to get rid of waste, more waste is being created. And so there's times when I'm like, ugh. But I think talking to especially members of FashionX all the time, and something I've really tried is like, as much as I've always kind of tried to find mentors, I'm trying to be a mentor even as a junior in college. And so kind of constantly working with young people and connecting them back into industry and careers is the most optimistic thing. It's like, in 20 years you're going to be running this company and it is going to be the most exciting thing, and I'm going to get to watch you. And so I think to be able to kind of say that as someone who is 21 is
Yeah.
so optimistic and so hopeful. And so I'm constantly inspired and constantly curious about kind of where our generation is going to lead us. But I know it's going to be a pretty amazing place.
Well, I love that optimism, and I share that optimism with you. And I also think from the perspective of like and I point to myself and others in my generation or older have so much to learn from you all because of the way that you're approaching and the fresh perspective you're bringing to a lot of this work, and that you don't have some of the baggage of this is the way it has to be done that a lot of us grew up with. And our culture was a little bit more listen to your elders, so to speak. And so
Yeah.
we were raised with that. And I think part of what this is to question. We're in a period of time where we all have to question each other. So we have as much to learn. And a friend of mine, Chip Conley, who was the founder of Joie de Vivre Hospitality, was tapped by the Airbnb guys or their investors to come help kind of work with them as they grew Airbnb. And he ended up writing a book about it, about this sort of mentorship 360 approach, because he went in there thinking like, oh, I have all this wisdom from all my years being an executive in hospitality to bring to these guys. And he's like, I learned as much, if not more, from them through the process. So he wrote a book about sort of this concept of the modern elder. And when you were talking, I'm like, I think anyone listening who's in, above yours, who the lick of humility, going to say the way we get this done is we get it done together, and there's a lot we can learn from this next generation coming up. So
no, totally. I mean, the question of like, I don't know, mentorship, I think, has always been everything in the fashion industry. Like, that's how you succeed is relationships and networking. But mentors, I think, need to start asking themselves, like, am I willing to mentee someone who is going to disagree with me, who is going to challenge me eventually? Because I'll benefit off of it in the future. Is like, that's the test. I think that's going to kind of create the cycle of progress within just kind of careers in the industry. I think that's a really good point.
Amazing. So two sort of closing points. There's so many things I wrote down. Well, first of all, I want to hear, what are you studying at St. Andrews? Yeah. Tell us why you're over in Scotland now. Tell us about your work.
Yeah. So I'm studying sustainable development, kind of trying to get into the nitty gritty, like energy stuff that will become more consequential to kind of direct policy that I'm interested in. And I'm trying to kind of use this quite quantitative approach to inform a lot of the research that I'm doing on waste and on kind of the resale industry and, where I want to go in the future. But it's been amazing. Scotland is surprisingly this incredible place to talk about sustainability. It's a world leader in a lot of different ways. And I've also just been able to engage with the outside so much more, which has been kind of awesome to someone who is into environmentalism and leading kind of a more eco-conscious life. But yes, that's what I'm doing at the moment.
That's amazing. And is your generation really thrifting? Like, people are really doing that to a large extent? I'm just curious because we hear that.
Yeah, all the time. I mean, I have to say, it's like in New York, we used to like meet on Broadway and do kind of all the fast fashion stores. I remember like all through middle school, we'd like meet at the top of Broadway and hit, Forever 21, H&M, go all the way down the list. And now we like meet in Williamsburg and do all of the thrift stores, like all of, the Beacon's Closet in the big warehouse ones, and kind of go diving. So that is kind of enough of an explanation. Like, we've evolved in the way we socially gather to shop, which is so exciting. And that's, I think, a huge kind of moment for young people to be shifting their shopping habits in a completely different direction.
And beyond luxury, like there's thrifting that's happening with more mid-tier and moderate price point stuff. Is that right?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and Depop, there's so many vehicles now to always shop secondhand, and affordably so, that and to be fair, I'm from New York. I feel like that also is kind of, I have access. That's a great conversation. I have access to thrifting, but we're seeing ThredUp and these kind of, Poshmark. eBay is going to make a comeback. I'm calling it for young people. There's kind of an exciting online secondhand side as well. So I think secondhand is going to be pretty much the future for this generation in particular.
Awesome. I've been inspired. I've been doing more of it in the last couple of years, and that of, because I think for a lot of people it's like, just be comfortable with it, and be excited. And in addition, there's also like through Renewal Workshop and folks that are out there refurbishing, there's also like this concept of getting, your Patagonia pullover been refurbished, which I've referenced in other podcasts because sometimes I wear my Renewal Workshop products from Patagonia. And that's a whole concept, which is that it's actually been like your app, it's been totally factory refurbished, right? So new zippers, new whatever, which is kind of an amazing way to look at it.
Oh
In
yeah. Oh,
closing,
absolutely. Hmm?
yeah, sorry, I mean to cut you.
Oh, no, no worries. I was just gonna say, yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
I've chosen to kind of specialize in the secondhand waste industry, and I already don't feel specialized enough. Like, it's so big.
yeah,
So there's so many kind of different ways, turning clothes into clothes, turning clothes into things that aren't clothes, and housing insulation. Like the list goes on as to what we can do with waste, and how we can do it more proactively. So if for anyone who's listening that's interested in sustainability, like it's a great kind of specialization to enter because there's so many different vehicles of engaging with it.
yeah. We in the cradle to cradle world, we say wasted, in your cycle, and like that's you're preaching, you're speaking my language. So do you see yourself being in the fashion industry, like post graduation, like that you'll be in this space building systems and companies or working inside companies?
Yeah, I mean that's the goal. I think right, like I said, I want to gravitate into the space where I'm going to have the most impact. And at the moment, that really feels like a place I'm not only passionate about, but where this conversation is exciting and people are engaging with it more seriously. And so I kind of want to get in while it's a hot topic and then just kind of continue it. I don't know at the moment kind of where in the industry I would really see myself being the most impactful. I think that's like my next golden question, is it worth it to kind of go into these big retailers and see what I can do? Or is there kind of another space? I mean, like AI is kind of a great example of this separate entity that does this kind of incredible outside sustainable work. And so that's kind of the next phase, is which aspect of the industry am I going to really grow the best in?
Perfect. Excellent. Well, we're always a resource for ideation with you. So
Absolutely.
in closing, which I really hate to do, what is your advice? What is your tip related to fashion, related to this space? Like, for those that are listening, what's your call to action?
Yeah. I think again, I want to make this kind of the most, we talk about conscious consumerism, and I want to make it as inclusive as possible. But as a consumer, like, find your own path to kind of being more conscious. And it doesn't have to be like, I'm going to shop at Eileen Fisher and Stella McCartney and I'm going to call it a day. It can be, if you only have access to fast fashion at the moment. My mom and I when we would shop, she would always be like, can you pair this item with more than 5 outfits in your closet? And when I applied that rule, my items lasted, 10 years, as opposed to I wasn't buying for a moment. And those are kind of ways that we can begin to engage as a consumer with long lasting, kind of slow fashion practices that aren't expensive or life changing. And so, kind of finding your level and then dedicating yourself to it as a consumer, I think, is my best advice, particularly for kind of other people in my generation that are trying to be more sustainable.
I love that. You just gave me a nugget of wisdom, which is the production model might be fast, but that doesn't mean you have to keep the consumption cycle fast, right? Mm,
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's the most accessible path to get on. It's not really affecting how much money you're spending on an item, but it's affecting how long that item is going to last in your closet. And that's step one. And that's
or
been a
someone
step
else's.
that, yeah, or someone else's step one. And my mom was telling me that before sustainability was even on her mind. So there's ways to kind of engage with
Yeah.
this, even if you feel like I can't make a difference in the corporate world. How do I make a difference in my closet, is such a good question for young people in particular.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, we are at our, but I just want to thank you so much for spending this time with me today. And as always, I leave any discussion or any kind of connection to you with sort of a greater and renewed optimism. So thank you for that.
Thank you for having me. This is awesome. And so excited for Gen F to kind of continue to come out and continue to do exciting things in the industry.
That's right. We're excited to roll it out, and we're really grateful you're a part of it. And it's really for you, by you, and it's like you are Generation Asset. Thank you.
Yay!
All right.
Yay! Thanks.
All right. Take care. Talk to you soon.
Bye.